welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised.
Journal entry, April 17th, 2025. It's just past midnight and I can't sleep. The samples I collected today are wrong. 3 years studying soil composition across the Midwest, and I've never seen anything like this. I should be methodical about this. Start from the beginning. My name is Dr. Morgan Heiser, soil scientist with the Agricultural Research Extension at K-State. My current grant project involves analyzing topsoil degradation across central Kansas farmland. Routine work, important but hardly the stuff of breakthrough science until today. I was taking core samples from the Hanover wheat fields about 40 miles west of Topeka. It started normally, categorizing basic soil profiles, checking pH levels, the usual. Around midday, I moved to the eastern edge of Crawford's property. Old man Elijah Crawford has owned that land for 60 years, but I'd never sampled there before. The soil looked ordinary enough at first glance, standard rich loam typical of this region. But when I extracted the core sample, something felt off. The weight was wrong, denser than it should have been by at least 30%. And the color, not the healthy dark brown you'd expect, but with these subtle maroon undertones, almost like dried blood, but not quite. When I touched it with my bare hands, stupid, I know, basic protocol failure, it felt warm. Soil doesn't retain heat like that, not unless it's been baking in direct sunlight all day, and this sample came from 6 inches below the surface. And there was something else, a slight vibration. So subtle I thought I was imagining it at first. I bagged several samples and moved to another test site about a quarter mile away. Same results. By my 4th sample, I was following every safety protocol in the book: gloves, mask, the works. Call it paranoia, but something about this soil felt actively wrong. I was packing up my gear when my truck radio suddenly blared to life. I turned it off hours ago to conserve the battery while I worked, so the sudden noise nearly made me drop my sample case. Through a burst of static, a voice emerged. Emergency alert system notification. The following message is transmitted at the request of the Kansas Department of Agriculture and the Environmental Protection Agency. Residents of Jefferson, Shawnee, and Waubonsee counties are advised that authorities are investigating reports of soil contamination in designated agricultural zones. This is a precautionary measure. Residents engaged in farming activities are advised to wear protective gloves when handling soil until further notice. This is an informational alert only. Further updates will be provided as information becomes available. This concludes this emergency alert system notification. The broadcast cut off, returning to static before the radio died completely. I tried to turn it back on, but nothing. Dead. I've changed the batteries twice since returning to my lab, but it won't power up. Completely fried. Here's what bothers me. I called the KDA when I got back to the lab. They claim they issued no such alert. The EPA regional office said the same thing. I checked online news sources, nothing about soil contamination advisories. It's as if the alert never happened, except I heard it clearly. Under the microscope, the samples reveal even more disturbing anomalies. The soil structure contains unfamiliar organic compounds that don't match any known soil bacteria or fungi in our database. There are these thread-like structures, almost like hyphae, but they appear to be pulsing, microscopic movement, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. I've run 3 different chemical analyses and each one returns error messages. The mass spectrometer actually shut down mid-process during the 3rd attempt. Our lab tech thinks I might have introduced contaminants, but I followed every protocol precisely. When I called Elijah Crawford to ask about unusual activity on his land, his response was strange. He was quiet for a long moment, then asked if I'd seen anything moving in the dirt. When I pressed him on what he meant, he quickly changed the subject, mentioned something about his crops growing faster than they should this season, despite the drought conditions. Before hanging up, he made me promise to come see him if I noticed anything unusual. His tone sent a chill down my spine. I should report this to my department head, but Dr. Winters is at a conference in Chicago until next week. Besides, what would I even say? The soil feels wrong and my radio played a fake emergency broadcast? I'd sound deranged. Deputy Sheriff Connors stopped by the lab this afternoon. She claimed it was a routine visit, checking in on university facilities, but her questions seemed oddly specific. Asked if I'd been experiencing equipment malfunctions, if I'd noticed any unusual wildlife behavior in the fields. When I mentioned the soil samples from Crawford's farm, she stiffened slightly before saying something vague about agricultural regulations. As she was leaving, she advised me to be careful handling anything from the ground. Those were her exact words. Not soil samples or dirt, anything from the ground. Tonight, I examined my hands under UV light. There's nothing visible to the naked eye, but under the purple glow, there are these tiny, almost imperceptible specks scattered across my palms and fingers, right where I first touched the soil sample without gloves. They form a pattern that reminds me of spore distribution, only more deliberate somehow. I've scrubbed 3 times with antimicrobial soap, but they're still there. I'm keeping the samples locked in the environmental containment unit overnight. Protocol says I should share unusual findings with colleagues for verification, but something tells me I should keep this quiet until I understand what I'm dealing with. Tomorrow, I'll return to Crawford's farm for more samples, properly equipped this time. The strangest thing, as I was driving home tonight, I could swear the soil along the roadside looked different, darker, more vital somehow, despite the drought we've been having. And in certain patches, it seemed to shift slightly as though disturbed by movement just beneath the surface. It's probably exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. I need sleep, but every time I close my eyes, I see those microscopic threads pulsing in rhythm like they're all connected to something larger, something waiting. And my hands still feel warm. Journal entry, April 18th, 2025. I haven't slept. Not really. Dozed fitfully for maybe 2 hours before jerking awake from dreams of things writhing beneath my bed. The specks in my hands haven't faded. If anything, they've become more prominent under UV light, forming what almost looks like a circuit pattern across my skin. I returned to Crawford's farm this morning. The fields looked normal in the early light, rolling waves of young wheat swaying in the breeze. Beautiful, actually. Too beautiful. The plants looked impossibly vibrant for April, especially given our rainfall deficit. When I mentioned this to Elijah Crawford, he just nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the distant tree line. Growth's been good this year, he said, working his jaw like he was chewing on something tough. Too good. Ain't natural. He finally agreed to show me something behind his barn, a small patch of land where he'd been disposing of animal carcasses for decades. Farm disposal pit, not uncommon in rural areas. What was uncommon was what was growing there now. The vegetation was unlike anything I've cataloged before. Fungi-like structures, but with a vascular system more typical of higher plants. Deep crimson caps with these undulating gill-like structures underneath. They seemed to retract slightly when shadows passed over them, photosensitive but in reverse, seeking darkness rather than light. Started growing about 3 weeks back, Crawford said, keeping his distance from the patch. Day after that meteorite or whatever it was fell in the south field. That got my attention. Meteorite? Did you report it? Crawford's weathered face tightened. Called County Emergency Services. They sent someone out. Man in a suit, not local, took the rock away, told me to forget about it, offered money for my discretion. He spat on the ground. I took the money, but I ain't blind. Something ain't right with my land now. I asked if I could take samples from the impact site. Crawford led me to a small depression in his south field. The crater was maybe 6 feet across, largely filled in already, deliberately, it seemed. But the soil there was different from my previous samples. Darker, slick, almost oily to touch, despite being dry, and warm, significantly warmer than the surrounding earth. As I was collecting samples, I noticed something disturbing. Small dead insects, beetles, ants, a grasshopper were scattered around the crater's edge, but they weren't just dead, they were wrong. Partially decomposed, yes, but with strange growths erupting from their carapaces, tiny filaments similar to the ones I'd observed under the microscope but visible to the naked eye. Some of these dead insects had been nearly consumed by these growths, transformed into unrecognizable lumps of writhing threads. I took samples of everything: soil, affected insects, even clippings of the strange fungi from behind the barn. Crawford watched me from a distance, nervously scanning the horizon as though expecting someone to appear. "Those government folks," he said as I was packing up. "They've been driving by. Black SUVs with tinted windows. Just watching." I asked when he'd last seen them. "Yesterday," he said, "right after you left." On my drive back to the lab, my truck radio suddenly switched on again, this time at full volume. The burst of sound nearly made me swerve off the road. Emergency Alert System Notification. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States Department of Agriculture and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Residents of Jefferson, Shawnee, Waubonsee, and now Riley counties are advised to avoid direct skin contact with all topsoil until further notice. Agricultural workers should use approved protective equipment when handling soil or crops. Residents should report any unusual plant growth, soil discoloration, or wildlife behavior to the County Emergency Management Office. This is a precautionary health measure. There is no need for public alarm. Further updates will be provided through official channels. This concludes this emergency alert system notification. This time, I recorded the message on my phone, but when I played it back at the lab, the recording contained only static. Every bit of it, over 40 seconds of meaningless noise. The alert happened. I know it did, but there's no evidence. I called the CDC and USDA. Same response, no such alert was issued. The County Emergency Management Office was equally baffled when I inquired about reporting unusual plant growth. The woman on the phone sounded suspicious, asked for my name and contact information. I gave her fake details. Under the microscope, today's samples reveal even more disturbing developments. The filaments in the soil are definitely growing, not just existing, but actively expanding their network while I observe them. They respond to light, to sound, even to the electrical field generated by the microscope itself. Most concerning, when I placed one of the affected dead insects near a fresh soil sample, the filaments from both specimens reached toward each other, eventually connecting and exchanging what appeared to be cellular material. They're communicating somehow. Order. I've noticed something else, a subtle smell emanating from the samples. Not unpleasant, exactly. earthy but with an underlying sweetness like overripe fruit on the verge of fermentation. The scent seems to intensify when I'm near the samples, almost as if they're reacting to my presence. Deputy Connors visited the lab again today. She seemed on edge, asking pointed questions about my research locations. When I mentioned Crawford's farm, she tensed visibly. "I'd advise staying away from that property for a while," she said, not meeting my eyes. "There's been some jurisdictional issues raised." When I pressed her about what she meant, she simply shook her head. "Just looking out for university personnel," she said, her hand resting casually on her holstered weapon. "Some places aren't safe right now." As she was leaving, she paused at the door. "Those samples you collected, they secure?" I assured her they were locked in our containment unit. "Good," she replied. "Keep them that way. And Dr. Heiser, if you start feeling unusual, call this number." She handed me a business card with only a phone number, no name, no agency. After she left, I examined my hands again under UV light. The pattern has definitely spread, now extending to my wrists. And there's something else. When I press on the affected skin, there's a subtle resistance, as though something thin but firm has developed just beneath the surface. I should report this to someone, but who would believe me? And after Deputy Connor's visit, I'm not sure who I can trust. Tonight, on my drive home, I saw 3 black SUVs parked at intervals along the highway, just sitting there with their engines running, watching. And the smell, that sweet, earthy smell from the lab samples, I can still smell it. Even here in my apartment, miles from the lab, it's as though it's followed me home. Or perhaps it's coming for me now. Journal entry, April 19th, 2025. This morning, my bathroom mirror revealed what I've been dreading. The patterns aren't just on my hands anymore. Thin, vein-like traceries have appeared on my forearms, climbing toward my elbows. Under normal light, they could be mistaken for unusual veins, but under UV, they glow with an unmistakable maroon luminescence, the same color as the soil samples. I've been wearing long sleeves to hide them. Called in sick to the university. Can't risk anyone seeing this. But I couldn't stay away from Crawford's farm. I need to understand what's happening. The drive to Hanover was surreal. Military vehicles on the highway, actual Humvees, and transport trucks heading west. A checkpoint had been established at the county line, but they were only stopping vehicles heading out of the area, not in. Strange priorities for a quarantine, if that's what this is. Crawford's farm had changed. Even from the access road, I could see it. His wheat field was no longer just abnormally vibrant, it was monstrous. Stalks twice their normal height, swaying in unison despite the lack of wind. The color wrong, not the healthy amber of ripening wheat, but a deep, bloody gold. Crawford met me at the edge of his property, refusing to let me drive further in. He looked haggard, eyes bloodshot, hands shaking. He'd aged a decade since I'd seen him 2 days ago. "Shouldn't have come back," he muttered, constantly glancing toward his fields. "They're watching, listening." "Who?" I asked. "The government?" He gave a broken laugh. "Them too. But I mean the plants, the soil. It's all aware now." I thought he was being metaphorical until he showed me his arm. The same patterns that marked my skin covered his entire forearm, but more developed. The lines had thickened, forming ridges beneath his skin, and at points the skin had split open, revealing not blood and tissue, but thin root-like structures writhing in the open air. "Started with just a patch," he said dully. "Thought it was a rash. Now it's spreading faster every day. Can feel it moving inside." I asked if he'd sought medical help. He just stared at me. Clinics closed. Everyone who went there disappeared. Military set up some kind of facility at the high school, calling it a decontamination center. Nobody who goes in comes back out walking the same. The sound interrupted us, the emergency broadcast tone blaring from both our phones simultaneously. Emergency alert system notification. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States Department of Defense and FEMA. A containment perimeter has been established around the following counties: Jefferson, Shawnee, Waubonsee, Riley, and Pottawatomie. Residents within these counties are advised to remain in their homes. Do not attempt to leave the designated containment zone. Agricultural activities are suspended until further notice. This is a routine agricultural quarantine measure to prevent the spread of a newly identified plant pathogen. Compliance is mandatory. Military checkpoints are in place at all county borders. If you have had direct contact with soil in the past 72 hours, report to your designated community center for screening. This concludes this emergency alert system notification. This time, when the alert ended, our phones remained operational. Progress, I suppose. The system isn't destroying electronics anymore, just our lives. Crawford's face had gone slack with fear. "It's happening," he whispered. Just like '88. When I asked what he meant, he seemed to struggle internally before finally speaking. "There was another meteor back then. Smaller. Government took it too. Plants started changing, but not like this. Not so fast. They burned 3 farms to the ground. Told everyone it was to contain corn blight." Before I could press him further, we heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors. Crawford's eyes widened. "They're coming. You need to go." "Back roads," he said, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "They're tracking phones. Leave yours here if you want to get out." I refused to abandon him, but he was insistent. "Too late for me," he said, rolling up his sleeve further to reveal that the rooty growths extended nearly to his shoulder. "Been too late since I touched that meteor. But someone needs to know." As the helicopter sound grew louder, he pressed something into my hand, a small jar containing a sample of soil, but different from what I'd collected. Darker, almost black, with visible movement within. "From the center of the impact," he whispered. "The heart of it. Study it. But don't let it touch you." I fled as the helicopter appeared overhead, taking the back access road Crawford had indicated. I abandoned my phone as he suggested, leaving it in a hollowed tree stump 1/2 mile from his farm. Through my rearview mirror, I saw black-clad figures rappelling from the helicopter onto Crawford's land. I took a circuitous route back to my apartment, avoiding main roads and checkpoints. The small towns I passed through were unnervingly quiet. Doors locked, windows shuttered despite the pleasant spring weather. In Rossville, I saw a disturbing sight, a playground where the sandbox appeared to be moving, the sand itself undulating like the surface of a liquid. No children in sight, no people at all. The university campus was equally deserted when I stopped by my lab to check on my samples. The containment unit had been breached, door hanging open, samples gone. My research notes as well. Everything related to Crawford's farm erased, except for the new sample in my pocket and the evidence spreading under my skin. Back in my apartment now, I've examined Crawford's jar under my personal microscope. The soil inside is unlike anything I've seen before. The filaments are more developed, organized into complex, almost circuit-like patterns. They pulse in perfect synchronization like a collective heartbeat, and they react when I bring my affected arm near the jar. The patterns beneath my skin begin to pulse in the same rhythm. There's no question now. This isn't contamination, it's communication. I've sealed the jar in a lead-lined box I used for storing radioactive isotopes during my doctoral research. Even through the shielding, I swear I can feel it calling to me, wanting to complete whatever process has begun in my tissue. The television and internet are full of conflicting reports. Official channels claim a non-harmful plant fungus is being contained. Social media, what hasn't been censored, tells different stories. Posts about people with strange growths being taken away, about farmland that moves when no one is watching, about voices coming from the ground. Most disturbing, I spotted Deputy Connors outside my apartment building an hour ago. Just sitting in her patrol car, watching my windows. She didn't approach, didn't call, just observed, occasionally speaking into her radio. When night fell, she was joined by two men in hazmat suits who entered the building. I heard them questioning my neighbors, looking for me undoubtedly. I'm writing this from my bathroom, the only room without windows. The patterns on my arms have reached my shoulders now. My skin feels tight, itchy from within. Something is growing inside me, spreading through tissue and bone. I've barricaded the apartment door, but I know it won't hold them for long. If they're coming for me, I want a record of what I've discovered, of what Crawford warned about. The soil of Kansas is no longer just soil, it's becoming something new, and so am I. Journal entry, April 20th, 2025. They came for me around 3 a.m. I heard them breaking down my apartment door, voices barking orders with military precision. I escaped through the bathroom window, down the fire escape, left almost everything behind except this journal, Crawford's soil sample, and a few essentials thrown into a backpack. The patterns have reached my neck now. Small tendrils curling along my jawline like some grotesque tattoo. I can feel them pulsing beneath my skin with each heartbeat, or perhaps my heart has simply adjusted to match their rhythm. It's becoming difficult to distinguish where I end and they begin. I'm writing from a storage unit I rented 6 months ago to keep field equipment. Not ideal, but it's paid up for the year and off any records connected to my university profile. I've set up a makeshift lab with portable equipment I managed to grab from my apartment. Basic microscope, UV light, some testing supplies, enough to keep studying what's happening to me, to us. My first discovery this morning was that the patterns respond to proximity with Crawford's sample. When I remove the jar from its LED container, the markings on my skin grow warm and the subtle movement beneath accelerates. Place it back in the box and they become dormant again. Distance creates disruption in whatever signal they're exchanging. Second discovery, the roots, I have to call them that now, growing under my skin, contain chlorophyll. I extracted a small sample from my forearm. The pain was extraordinary, like pulling out a living nerve, and found plant cells interwoven with what appear to be my own tissues. Hybrid cells. My body isn't being replaced, it's being augmented, transformed into something that's neither fully human nor fully plant. While examining the sample, my burner phone, purchased with cash this morning, sounded another alert. Emergency alert system notification. The following message is transmitted by the Kansas Emergency Management Agency and the Department of Defense. All residents within the expanded containment zone, now including Douglas, Jackson, and Geary counties, must report to designated quarantine shelters immediately. Those experiencing unusual skin discoloration, excessive fatigue, or heightened auditory sensitivity must identify themselves upon arrival for priority medical treatment. Soil contact protocols are in full effect. Do not touch exposed earth with bare skin. Military personnel are authorized to escort non-compliant individuals to safety. This is not a test. This concludes this emergency alert system notification. Heightened auditory sensitivity. That caught my attention. For the past few hours, I've been hearing something just at the edge of perception. Not quite a sound, more like pressure changes, rhythmic pulses that seem to emanate from the ground itself. I thought it was stress-induced tinnitus until I read that alert. They know exactly what's happening to people like me. They're tracking the symptoms. I ventured out briefly this afternoon, hood pulled low to hide my face and neck. Lawrence is transformed. Military vehicles at every major intersection. People being loaded onto buses, their faces blank with shock or contorted in resistance. Soldiers in hazmat gear conducting door-to-door searches. And the soil everywhere I looked, in planters and tree beds and cracks in the sidewalk, it seemed more vibrant, almost glistening in the afternoon sun. Pulsing with the same rhythm I feel under my skin. I encountered Deputy Connors unexpectedly outside a convenience store. She didn't see me at first, and I observed her from a distance. She was arguing with someone on her radio, her face tense with frustration. As she turned, I caught sight of her neck, the same pattern of veins visible there, though less advanced than mine. She's infected too, but still following orders. When she spotted me, her hand moved to her weapon, but she didn't draw it. Instead, she approached slowly, keeping her voice low. "Dr. Heiser, you shouldn't be out here." I asked if she was going to turn me in. She glanced at the military checkpoint visible down the street, then back at me. "They're not helping people," she said quietly. "The treatment they promised, it's not medical care. They're studying the progression, cataloging how it changes us." I asked her what she knew about the infection's origin. "Not here," she replied, glancing around nervously. "Meet me at Lone Star Lake, the abandoned boat dock on the North Shore. Midnight. I can tell you what I know, but you need to bring your research, whatever you've learned about this thing." I'm not sure if I can trust her, but I have few options and fewer allies. As darkness fell, something new happened. The patterns on my skin began to glow, faintly at first, then with increasing intensity. A subtle bioluminescence, visible even through my clothing. I had to wrap myself in extra layers just to conceal it. More alarming, Crawford's soil sample is also glowing, perfectly synchronized with my skin. And the rhythmic sensation I've been feeling has intensified into something I can only describe as a voice, not speaking in words, but in impressions, urges. It wants me to go west. Toward the original impact site, I assume. The pull is almost irresistible. Around 10 p.m., my burner phone lit up with yet another alert, but this one was different. No audio alarm, just a text message. Emergency Management Directive. Authorized personnel only. Operation Topsoil Containment Protocols have been upgraded to Level 5. All Class 3 specimens to be secured for immediate transport to Site Echo. Resistance indicates progression to Class 4. Use of terminal protocols authorized for Class 4 and above. Sunrise deadline for total clearance of affected sectors. This is not a drill. This wasn't meant for civilian phones. Someone patched me into the military communication system, perhaps Connors. The implications are chilling. Terminal protocols. Total clearance. They're planning something drastic for tomorrow morning. As midnight approaches, I'm preparing to meet Connors. I'm bringing this journal and minimal research materials, but leaving Crawford's samples secured here. It's too dangerous to carry, both because of how it affects me and because it's clearly what they're looking for. Before I go, I need to document one more observation. The roots beneath my skin have reached a new phase. At my wrists and elbows, small ruptures have formed, not painful, surprisingly, where tiny filaments have emerged. They're like delicate aerial roots sensing the air around them. When I bring them near ordinary soil, they recoil, but when I open Crawford's sample, they stretch toward it with unmistakable purpose. I'm becoming something else. Something that recognizes the difference between Earth as it was and Earth as it's becoming. If I don't return from this meeting with Connors, if someone else is reading this journal, know this. What's happening isn't just an infection or contamination. It's an intelligence spreading through the soil and into us, rewriting biology from the ground up. And it has a purpose. Journal entry, April 21st, 2025. I'm not sure I should be writing this down. Every word feels like a risk now that I know they're monitoring everything, cell signals, internet traffic, even paper purchases. But documenting this might be the only way to maintain what remains of my humanity as the change accelerates. The meeting with Deputy Connors was a trap, not set by her. She's as desperate as I am, but someone had followed her. As I approached the boat dock at Lone Star Lake, I caught the gleam of tactical gear in the moonlight, military personnel positioned in the trees surrounding our meeting point. I almost turned back, but Connors emerged from the shadows and gestured urgently for me to follow her, away from the dock and into an old maintenance shed nearby. Her eyes were wild with panic, and in the dim light filtering through the dirty windows, I could see the patterns had spread across her face, delicate soil-colored branches extending from her neck up to her cheekbones. "They're tracking us by our heat signatures," she whispered, pulling me down behind a rusty workbench. "The patterns in our skin give off a different thermal reading than normal human tissue." She showed me her department-issued tablet. The thermal imaging of the area showed normal human forms in red and orange, the soldiers, and 2 anomalous signatures in green and blue, us. "That's how they're identifying infected civilians so quickly," she explained. "Thermal scanners at the quarantine entry points." I asked how she'd discovered this. "Major Fields let it slip during a briefing yesterday. He thinks I'm still on their side." She unbuttoned her collar, revealing more extensive patterning than I'd initially seen. "But I'm further along than you. Another day, maybe 2, before I reach what they're calling Class 4, the designation from the emergency alert." "What happens at Class 4? Connor's face darkened. "Terminal protocols." She pulled up a classified brief on her tablet. The military had established a classification system for the infection. Class 1, initial exposure, no visible symptoms. Class 2, dermal patterning begins, limited to extremities. Class 3, patterning spreads to torso and neck, mild physiological changes. Class 4, full facial patterning, advanced physiological changes, communal behavior. Class 5, complete transformation, details redacted. "I'm late Class 3, she said. "You're mid-Class 3. Once the patterns reach our eyes, we're Class 4. That's when they stop pretending to help and start containing the threat." I asked what she knew about the origin of the infection. 3 months ago, something crashed in a field outside Tonganoxie. Military secured it within hours, claimed it was a meteorite, nothing to worry about. 2 weeks later, Crawford, the farmer who owned that land, reported strange growth patterns in his winter wheat. Soil samples were taken, Crawford's farm was quarantined, and then she gestured at herself. This started happening to the scientists studying those samples, then to the soldiers guarding them, then to farmers across 3 counties. The noise outside made us both freeze. Flashlight beams swept past the grimy windows. We pressed ourselves against the floor, barely breathing. "We need to move," Connors whispered when the patrol had passed. "I have a cabin about 20 miles from here, off-grid, no official records. We can..." Her radio crackled to life, making us both jump. All units, be advised, satellite imagery shows anomalous root systems expanding below ground throughout Douglas County. Repeat, subterranean growth accelerating. All personnel maintain soil contact protocols. The voice shifted to Major Fields. Deputy Connors, report position immediately. She switched off her radio with trembling hands. We don't have much time, she said. They're going to implement the sunrise protocols. We need to get as far from Lawrence as possible. We slipped out of the shed and into the woods surrounding the lake. As we moved through the trees, I noticed something disturbing. The patterns on my skin were responding to the environment. When we passed certain patches of earth, they would pulse more intensely, as if recognizing something familiar. Connor saw me examining my arm. It's happening to me too, she said. It's like the soil is talking to us now. I told her about the pulling sensation I'd been feeling, the urge to go west. That's where most of the infected end up, she whispered. If they escape quarantine, they start walking west. Militaries established a secondary containment barrier outside Topeka. As we reached her patrol vehicle, hidden on a service road, my burner phone lit up with another alert. Emergency Alert System Notification. This is an urgent update from the Kansas Department of Emergency Management. Due to the escalating biological contamination, a mandatory evacuation order is now in effect for all residents of Douglas, Jefferson, Shawnee, and Leavenworth counties. Military checkpoints have been established on all major highways. Citizens must present identification and submit to medical screening. Martial law is now in effect. Curfew begins at 2100 hours and ends at 0600 hours. Any unauthorized persons found outside designated safe zones during curfew will be detained. Individuals with any skin abnormalities must report to medical authorities immediately. Harboring infected individuals is a federal offense under Emergency Powers Act Section 7. Do not attempt to leave the containment zone without authorization. This concludes this emergency alert system notification. Martial law. They were no longer pretending this was just a health crisis. As Connors drove us through back roads avoiding checkpoints, I noticed something even more alarming. The patterns on my skin had begun to shift and move of their own accord like slow-flowing liquid. And where my fingers touched the car door, tiny filaments had extended outward, making contact with the metal and plastic. I pulled my hand back in horror, watching as the filaments slowly retracted back into my skin. I wasn't just infected, I was becoming a vector. Don't worry about it, Connor said, noticing my reaction. The same thing happened to me yesterday. It only seems interested in organic materials and certain metals. It's selecting. Selecting for what? She didn't answer, just kept driving, her eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. An hour later, we arrived at her cabin, a small structure nestled in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. As we stepped from the car, both of us gasped in unison. The ground around the cabin was glowing with the same faint bioluminescence as our skin, a network of light spreading between the trees. Inside, Connors locked and barricaded the door before pulling out a first aid kit. We need to document our progression, she said clinically, taking out a digital camera. For whoever comes after. She photographed the patterns on my skin, then handed me the camera to do the same for her. The images were shocking. The branching structures had a mathematical precision to them. Fractals that mirrored natural growth patterns, but with an underlying geometry that felt alien, designed. Watch, she said, placing her hand on the wooden table. After a moment, the pattern on her palm pulsed and thin filaments extended downward, penetrating the wood. When she pulled back, the filaments retracted, but left microscopic holes behind. It's not just in us, she whispered. We're becoming its instruments, I think. I think it's building something. I asked her what she meant. This isn't a disease, Morgan. It's an installation program. The soil was just the initial medium. Now it's upgrading to more complex systems, Oberos. And a sudden noise outside made us both turn. Through the window, we could see the forest floor pulsing with light, stronger now, rippling outward in concentric circles from some point in the distance. Over this surreal sight, a new emergency broadcast blared from Connor's vehicle radio. This is not a test. This is an emergency directive from the United States Northern Command. All civilian broadcasts are suspended. Code Alpha November Tango Hotel Romeo Oscar Papa Oscar Sierra. Operation Sunrise now in effect. All military personnel execute contingency echo immediately. This concludes all emergency broadcasts in affected sectors. The radio went silent. Then, in the distance, we heard the first explosions. They're burning it, Connor said softly, watching the horizon begin to glow orange. They're trying to burn it out of the soil. I felt a sudden, overwhelming pain as the patterns on my skin reacted, contracting, pulsing frantically. Connors doubled over beside me, experiencing the same agony. They can't stop it this way, she gasped. Don't they understand? It's already beyond the soil now. It's in the water table, in the crops, in us. As the distant fire illuminated the night sky, I noticed something emerging from Connor's hairline, tiny, delicate structures pushing through her scalp like seedlings seeking sunlight. I reached up to my own head and felt the same. We were blooming. Journal entry, April 22nd, 2025. The fires burned all night. From our vantage point in Connor's cabin, we watched the eastern horizon glow orange, then red, then a sickly purple as whatever chemicals they were using reacted with the infected soil. Helicopters passed overhead continuously, not just military transports, but unmarked craft with specialized equipment hanging beneath them, spraying substances that drifted down in glittering clouds. The pain subsided around dawn, replaced by something worse, a collective scream, not audible, at least not to normal human ears, but felt through the pattern spreading across our bodies. A vibration that resonated through the filaments under our skin, through the emerging growths on our scalps, through the very marrow of our bones. They're dying, Connors whispered, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her palms against the wooden floor. Millions of them. Burning. I didn't need to ask who they were. The connection between us and the soil had progressed beyond mere infection. We were extensions of it now, or it was an extension of us, the boundaries blurring with each passing hour. By mid-morning, the seedling-like growths on our heads had developed into delicate, translucent structures about 2 inches long, feathery filaments that moved with the slightest air current. When sunlight touched them through the cabin windows, they turned toward it like heliotropic plants. Connor's police radio remained silent, but we picked up scattered transmissions on an old ham radio she kept for emergencies. Fragmented reports from civilian channels described a full military lockdown across eastern Kansas, roadblocks on every highway, drones patrolling rural areas, people being forcibly removed from farms and small towns. One transmission, abruptly cut off mid-sentence, reported something massive moving underground near the Wakarusa River. Around noon, Connors made a decision. We need to see what's happening. Really happening, not just what we can observe from here. She revealed a topographical map of the county and pointed to a location about 3 miles from the cabin. There's a National Guard armory here. Small facility, minimal staffing usually. If they're following standard operating procedure for a Class 1 biological event, they'll have established a forward command post there. You want to break into a military installation? I asked incredulously. In our condition? She unbuttoned her uniform shirt, The patterns had spread across her torso entirely now, forming intricate fractals that pulsed with a subtle inner light. Our condition is exactly why we need to go. They know more about what's happening to us than we do. I couldn't argue with that logic, but the risk seemed enormous. They'll detect us immediately with their thermal imaging. Connor smiled grimly. Not if we go underground. She pulled back a rug in the main room of the cabin, revealing a trapdoor. Root cellar, she explained, but it connects to something older. The previous owner was paranoid about government surveillance, dug tunnels connecting to an old storm drainage system. One branch runs within a quarter-mile of the armory. The idea of going underground surrounded by soil in our condition terrified me, but she was right, we needed information. The tunnel was low and narrow, forcing us to crouch as we moved through the damp darkness. Connors led the way with a flashlight, though we discovered we hardly needed it. The patterns on our skin provided a ghostly blue-green illumination, brightening when we touched the earthen walls. And we did touch them, not accidentally, but drawn to make contact. The filaments emerging from our fingers extended eagerly into the soil, creating momentary connections that sent pulses of information, sensation. Something indescribable flowed between us and the earth. "Do you feel that?" Connors whispered as we paused at a junction in the tunnel system. "There's something big down here with us." I felt it, a presence, vast and patient, moving slowly through the earth around us. Not threatening, exactly, but overwhelming in its alienness, like standing in the shadow of a skyscraper and suddenly realizing it's alive. We followed a branch tunnel that sloped gradually upward, eventually reaching a rusted metal door. Beyond it lay the drainage system, concrete pipes large enough to stand in, carrying runoff from the hills toward the river. As we moved through these larger tunnels, the sensation of presence grew stronger. The concrete walls were lined with a fine network of filaments similar to those emerging from our skin, a living mesh spreading through infrastructure humans had built, repurposing it. After nearly an hour of careful navigation, Connors held up her hand, signaling a stop. Above us, a metal grate let in shafts of daylight. We could hear voices, military personnel discussing perimeter security. "We're just outside the armory grounds," she whispered. "There should be an access point to their communications center through the old maintenance tunnels." She led me to a narrow offshoot where the drainage system connected to older brick tunnels, clearly dating back many decades. As we squeezed through a partially collapsed section, my hand brushed against one wall and I felt an immediate electric connection, not with the bricks themselves, but with something growing within them. Without thinking, I pressed my palm flat against the surface. The patterns on my skin flared with light, and the filaments extended outward, merging with the wall. Suddenly, I could sense the entire tunnel network as if it were part of my own nervous system, every branch, every chamber, every root penetrating from above. And I could sense something else, hundreds of human forms moving through sections of the tunnels less than a mile away. People like us in various stages of transformation, all moving with singular purpose towards some central point deep underground. "Morgan!" I pulled my hand back with effort, the filaments reluctantly withdrawing from the brick. "There are others," I gasped. "Hundreds of them in these tunnels, moving west." Connors looked unsurprised. "The pull we've been feeling, they're answering it too." We pressed on, eventually reaching a section where newer concrete walls indicated human military construction. A heavy steel door blocked our path, but when Connors placed her hand near the electronic lock, something extraordinary happened. The filaments from her fingertips extended toward the keypad, splitting into impossibly fine tendrils that inserted themselves into the mechanism. Her eyes unfocused, staring at nothing as the lock clicked open. "How did you do that?" I whispered in astonishment. She looked at her hand as the filaments retracted. "I didn't. It did. It understood the system. The electrical pathways. Beyond the door lay a maintenance corridor clearly within the military facility. We moved silently, following Connor's instincts until we reached a room humming with electronic equipment, computer servers, communication arrays, and multiple monitors displaying maps of eastern Kansas overlaid with colored zones. One screen showed thermal satellite imagery of the region. Vast areas glowed with the same distinctive heat signature as our transformed skin, not just isolated spots, but entire networks spreading beneath towns, farms, highways. The root system had grown far beyond what the military was publicly acknowledging. Another monitor displayed a countdown, 18 hours, 24 minutes, and 53 seconds, and decreasing by the second. 18 hours until what? I murmured. Before Connors could respond, a door at the far side of the room opened. Major Fields walked in, accompanied by two soldiers in hazmat suits. He was looking down at a tablet, unaware of our presence. Increase the dosage in sectors 7 through 13, he was saying. The standard defoliant isn't penetrating below 3 feet. We need total soil sterilization to at least 20 feet if we're going to... He looked up and froze, seeing us. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, to my shock, Fields dismissed the soldiers with the curt "Leave us." After they'd gone, he carefully placed his tablet on a desk and regarded us with clinical interest. "Deputy Connors, Dr. Heiser, I should be surprised to find you here, but given how your transformation is progressing, perhaps not." His eyes lingered on the growths emerging from our scalps, the patterns visible on our faces and hands. "Class 4, he murmured. "Right on schedule." "What are you doing to the soil?" Connors demanded. "To us?" Fields sighed, suddenly looking exhausted. "Trying to contain something we barely understand." He gestured to the monitors. "But as you can see, we're failing." He turned one screen toward us, showing footage from what appeared to be a laboratory. Scientists in sealed suits examined a pulsating mass of soil-like material that had formed itself into an intricate geometric structure. "The original sample," Fields explained, "from the impact site. We thought it was just contaminated soil at first, some exotic microbe or fungus. By the time we realized it was a complete biological system with its own intelligence, it had already begun spreading." On another screen, an emergency alert was being prepared for broadcast. Emergency alert system notification. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States Department of Defense. Operation Firebreak is now in effect. All residents within 100 miles of the Kansas-Missouri border must evacuate immediately. Proceed eastward on designated evacuation routes. Do not delay. Do not attempt to gather belongings. Do not attempt to travel westward under any circumstances. Military checkpoints will direct evacuees to safe zones. This is not a test. The countdown timer suddenly made horrifying sense. "You're going to burn everything," I said quietly. "The entire eastern half of the state." Fields didn't deny it. "It's already reached the Missouri River. If it crosses to the eastern bank, models predict total continental spread within weeks." He looked at us almost pleadingly. "We don't have a choice." "It won't work," Connor said, her voice taking on a strange, resonant quality that wasn't entirely her own. "Fire cannot stop what has already taken root below." As if in response to her words, the facility's lights flickered. A rumble vibrated through the floor beneath our feet. "What was that?" Fields demanded, suddenly alert. The answer came from everywhere at once, a sound like tearing fabric, but magnified 1,000-fold. The concrete floor split open as something massive pushed up from below. Journal entry, April 23, 2025. I'm no longer certain this journal serves any purpose beyond habit. The transformation has progressed to the point where my thoughts are becoming distributed. Parts of my consciousness seem to exist outside my body, now flowing through the network that spreads beneath the Kansas soil. Yet I continue writing, clinging to this human ritual like a drowning person to driftwood. What emerged from beneath the floor of the military facility defies easy description. Not a root or a tendril in any conventional sense, but a column of living matter, soil and organic material woven together with the metallic-looking filaments we've seen growing from our own skin. It rose up between us and major fields, splitting the concrete as effortlessly as breaking through wet paper. The structure was as thick as a mature oak tree and pulsed with the same bioluminescence as our transformed skin. Its surface rippled with constant motion, like muscles under skin, and at its crown it split into dozens of finer branches that reached toward the ceiling, the walls, the electronic equipment, and us. Fields scrambled backward, drawing his sidearm and firing 3 shots into the mass. The bullets disappeared into it without visible effect, absorbed like stones dropped into thick mud. "Containment breach," he shouted into his radio. "Full evacuation of Site Bravo." I repeat, evacuate all personnel immediately. Alarms blared throughout the facility, red emergency lights casting everything in a hellish glow. The filaments extending from the column suddenly accelerated toward Fields, wrapping around his legs before he could retreat further. He emptied his magazine into the tendrils, but they continued pulling him toward the main mass. I should have felt horror watching this, but something had shifted in me. I felt only a cold curiosity as Fields was drawn into the column, not struggling as I would have expected, but staring at it with an expression of terrible recognition. When he spoke, his voice was eerily calm. "It's what we found inside the meteorite," he said, looking directly at me. "Not contaminated soil. Soil from somewhere else. Somewhere very far away." Then he was enveloped, disappearing into the mass as it pulsed with renewed intensity. The column swayed toward us next, but instead of grabbing or consuming us as it had Fields, it merely touched the filaments growing from our scalps with its own delicate tendrils. The connection sent a jolt of sensation through my entire body, not pain, but expansion. As if my consciousness suddenly occupied much more space than my physical form. Images flooded my mind, vast fields of churning soil-like material stretching to alien horizons, immense structures rising and falling in rhythmic patterns. A journey through darkness so profound and lengthy that time itself seemed meaningless. Impact. Pain. Awakening in strange new Earth. First contact with terrestrial organisms, microbes, insects, plant roots. Learning. Adapting. Rebuilding. "It's showing us," Connors whispered beside me, her eyes wide and unfocused. "It's home. It's purpose." The facility shook around us as more columns burst through the floor, walls, and ceiling. Through our newfound connection, I sensed similar eruptions occurring across eastern Kansas, the network revealing itself after months of underground growth. We fled as the structure began to collapse, guided not by sight, but by the pull of the network, which now seemed to regard us as valuable components rather than mere hosts. It wanted us alive and mobile, able to interface between its expanding system and the human world it was infiltrating. We emerged into chaos. Military personnel scrambled into vehicles, abandoning the armory as columns of living matter erupted from the earth across the compound. Helicopters circled overhead, some dropping incendiary devices that created rings of fire around the largest eruptions. An emergency broadcast blared from speakers mounted on fleeing military trucks. "This is a mandatory evacuation order. All military personnel and civilian contractors must abandon Containment Zone Alpha immediately. Proceed to Rally Point Echo for decontamination. The firebreak protocol has been advanced to 0600 hours. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill.
They've moved up the timeline, Connor said, her voice oddly distorted by the filaments now extending from her throat and jaw. We have less than 12 hours before they burn everything.
We appropriated an abandoned jeep and drove west, away from the evacuation routes, deeper into what the military was calling the containment zone. The pull was stronger now, unmistakable, a biological imperative to move toward whatever lay at the center of the network. As we drove, I observed the landscape transforming around us. Fields that had been green just days ago now displayed patches of altered soil, darker, richer, pulsing with subtle light in the growing dusk. From these patches rose structures similar to what had emerged in the armory, though smaller and more varied in form. Some resembled trees without leaves, others were more like coral formations or fungal growths scaled to monstrous proportions. And there were people, hundreds of them, walking with deliberate purpose through fields and forests, all moving in the same general direction. Some still looked mostly human, with only the characteristic soil-colored patterns marking their skin. Others were more heavily transformed, with extensive growths emerging from their heads and backs, filaments trailing behind them like living cloaks. They paid no attention to us as we passed, their eyes fixed on some distant point only they could perceive. What happens when they reach wherever they're going? I wondered aloud. Connors didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice contained harmonics that no human vocal cords could produce. Integration, she said simply. We abandoned the jeep when the roads became impassable, blocked by fallen trees or eruptions of the living structures. On foot, we joined the procession of transformed humans, becoming part of the silent migration. By nightfall, my transformation had accelerated dramatically. The patterns now covered every inch of my skin, pulsing in synchronization with the structures rising from the earth around us. The filaments growing from my scalp had extended down my back, forming a sensory array that could detect subtle changes in air composition, electromagnetic fields, and the movements of the network beneath the soil. Most disturbing of all, my right arm had begun to change at a cellular level. The skin split painlessly along my forearm, revealing not blood and muscle, but a dense mesh of the same soil-like material that formed the emerging structures. It moved with my thoughts, responding to my will, but it was unquestionably no longer human tissue. Through our enhanced connection to the network, Connors and I sensed a massive military mobilization to our east. Aircraft, armored vehicles, troops in hazmat gear forming a perimeter around the containment zone. They were establishing what they called the firebreak, a scorched earth barrier to prevent the spread of the network. What they didn't understand, what we now knew through our connection, was that the network had already extended tendrils deep beneath their perimeter, following aquifers and bedrock fissures miles beyond their detection capabilities. Around midnight, we encountered Elijah Crawford, the farmer whose land had received the initial impact. I barely recognized him. His transformation was far more advanced than ours, his body seeming to dissolve at the edges into fine tendrils that connected directly to the soil beneath him. Only his face remained mostly human, though the patterns had completely overtaken it, making him appear carved from living earth. "Dr. Heiser," he acknowledged, his voice resonating through the ground as much as the air. "You've come to witness the communion. What is happening to us?" I asked, though I already knew the answer on some level. The alien memories shared through the network had shown me fragments of the truth. Crawford smiled, an expression both serene and terrifying on his transformed face. "We are becoming the foundation," he said. "The old soil is being replaced. Earth is being upgraded. For what purpose? Connors asked beside me. Crawford turned his gaze to the west, where a glow that had nothing to do with the setting sun illuminated the horizon. To prepare the ground, he said simply. They've been searching for suitable worlds for millennia. Ours has the right composition, but requires conditioning. A new emergency alert suddenly cut through the night, broadcasting not just from abandoned military equipment, but from every functioning speaker system for miles. Car radios, public address systems, even personal devices carried by the transformed humans around us. Emergency alert system notification. This is your final warning. By order of the President of the United States and the Department of Defense, Operation Firebreak will commence at 0600 hours. Any persons remaining within the containment zone after 0500 hours will be considered lost. May God have mercy on our souls. The alert, repeated once, then dissolved into static. Through that static, barely perceptible, came another sound, not a human voice, but a signal, a calling that resonated through the patterns on our skin and the filaments extending from our bodies. Crawford nodded as if confirming something. The broadcast network has been assimilated, he said. The primary node awakens. We must hurry if you wish to witness the first flowering. He turned and continued westward, his lower body seeming to flow rather than walk across the transformed landscape. After a moment's hesitation, we followed, joining the pilgrimage of the changed. Behind us, the first artillery shells began to fall, illuminating the eastern sky with flashes of man-made lightning. The firebreak had begun early. Ahead, something vast was rising from the Kansas earth, reaching toward the stars from which it had come. Journal entry, April 24th, 2025. Deputy Connors is gone. I need to record what happened, but my hands won't stop trembling. Not from fear, I'm beyond that now, but from the constant vibrations pulsing through the soil beneath me, through my body, through every transformed cell of my being. We reached what Crawford called the primary node just before dawn. The military's artillery strikes had stopped around 3 a.m., which Connors correctly interpreted as preparation for aerial bombardment. We had perhaps 2 hours before the real devastation began. The node dominated a vast field that had once been wheat, now transformed into undulating waves of the alien soil-like substance. The structure resembled a massive mushroom or coral formation towering nearly 30 stories high, its surface rippling with the same bioluminescent patterns that now covered my skin. At its base, hundreds, perhaps thousands of transformed humans stood in concentric circles, their bodies connected to the central mass by thick umbilical cords of filaments. "If the communion," Crawford whispered reverently as we approached. The first true integration of terrestrial consciousness with the network. The sight should have horrified me. Instead, I felt a profound longing, as if witnessing something I'd been unknowingly seeking my entire life. Connors stepped forward, her transformation more advanced than mine. The filaments from her scalp had formed a crown-like structure pulsing with light that synchronized perfectly with the massive node before us. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice carrying harmonics impossible for human vocal cords. "I can feel it calling." Before I could respond, the emergency alert system activated again, not through speakers this time, but directly through our connection to the network. The message wasn't in words or even sounds, but pure information flooding our altered neural pathways. Military aircraft approaching from east and south. High-yield incendiary payloads detected. Estimated time to impact, 17 minutes. Accelerate integration protocols. Prioritize preservation of network core. Crawford nodded as if he'd been expecting this. "The harvest must begin now," he said, placing a hand on Connor's shoulder. His fingers sank partially into her flesh, not wounding, but merging. "You're ready. Your neural architecture is ideal. Connor showed no fear as Crawford guided her toward the central node. I tried to follow, but several transformed humans blocked my path, their expressions blank, yet somehow purposeful. "Not yet, Dr. Heiser," Crawford called back to me. "Your transformation isn't complete. You still have another role to fulfill." I watched helplessly as Connors approached the massive structure. The crowd parted to form a path leading directly to a pulsating opening at its base. As she stepped inside, filaments extended from the interior, enveloping her completely before drawing her deeper into the node. The integration was quick, too quick for what should have been a complex biological process. One moment, Connors was visible within the translucent walls of the structure. The next, her form seemed to dissolve, her features stretching and spreading throughout the node's tissues like ink dropped in water. A shudder ran through the assembled crowd, a collective exhalation as if witnessing something sacred. The node pulsed brighter, patterns flowing across its surface with new complexity. Then the emergency alert system activated again, this time broadcasting through conventional channels, every radio, television, and cellular network in the region. But the voice that emerged wasn't human. It wasn't even a voice in any traditional sense, more a modulated series of tones interspersed with words that sounded like Connors but stripped of all inflection. Emergency Advisory Network Notification. This message supersedes all previous alerts. The soil enrichment program is proceeding as designed. Resistance is counterproductive to terrestrial advancement. Disregard military evacuation orders. Remain in your homes. Allow the soil to enter. Become substrate. Become foundation. Become earth. The broadcast repeated 3 times before dissolving into a rhythmic pattern of static and tones that made my skin tingle and the filaments on my scalp vibrate in sympathetic resonance. "What have you done to her?" I demanded, turning to Crawford, whose form had grown even more abstract, his lower body now entirely dissolved into the network beneath us. "Done to her?" He seemed genuinely confused by my question. "We've elevated her. Deputy Connors no longer exists as a discrete entity. She has become the voice of the network, the interface between old humanity and new Earth." A distant rumble drew our attention skyward. Military aircraft, bombers, and fighter jets appeared on the horizon, black specks against the lightning dawn. Crawford observed them with detached curiosity. "They'll try to burn us out," he said, "but fire cannot destroy what is already rooted so deeply." The network extends nearly a mile beneath the surface now, following the aquifer. As if in response to his words, the ground began to tremble more violently. Around the perimeter of the field, new structures burst from the soil, not the organic columns we'd seen before, but something more mechanical. They resembled massive cannons constructed from the same living material as the central node, aiming skyward at precise angles. The emergency broadcast system activated again, now with a voice that was even less like Connor's, deeper and layered with subharmonics. Defense protocols initiated. Aerial threats identified. Spore dispersal system activated. All network components prepare for temporary atmospheric modification. "Spores?" I asked, my scientific mind still grasping for understanding even as my transformed body responded instinctively to the network's commands, the filaments on my scalp retracting closer to my head. Crawford's face, what remained of it, formed something like a smile. "How else would we spread efficiently? The military's attack will serve our purpose perfectly. The thermal updrafts from their bombardment will carry our spores into the upper atmosphere, dispersing them across the continent." The cannon-like structures began to pulse, building energy. At their tips, bulbous pods formed and swelled, glowing with intense bioluminescence. I felt a sudden, desperate need to warn someone, anyone still human, about what was about to happen. But my communicator had long since merged with the filaments growing from my arm, and the network controlled all conventional broadcast systems. Then I remembered Major Field's satellite phone, which I'd taken from his abandoned pack at the military facility. Remarkably, it was still in my pocket, partially absorbed into my transformed flesh, but potentially functional. While Crawford's attention was fixed on the approaching aircraft, I pried the device from my hip where filaments had begun integrating it into my body. The pain was excruciating, like tearing off my own skin, but I managed to wrench it free. 3 fingers on my right hand had fully transformed into the soil-like substance, making it difficult to dial, but I managed to input the emergency federal response code Fields had mentioned. A voice answered immediately. "This is Federal Emergency Response. Identify yourself." "Dr. Morgan Heiser," I gasped, keeping my voice low. "Soil contamination specialist. I'm inside the Kansas containment zone. The aerial bombardment, you have to abort. It's what they want." "The spores?" Crawford turned suddenly, his transformed sensory apparatus detecting my betrayal. A tendril shot from his arm, wrapping around the phone and crushing it. "Disappointing, Dr. Heiser," he said, his voice resonating through the ground beneath us. "I had hoped you understood what we're becoming. This isn't an invasion, it's an evolution. Earth's soil has remained essentially unchanged for millions of years. It's time for advancement." Above us, the aircraft began their bombing run, releasing their payloads toward the central node. Simultaneously, the cannon-like structures fired, launching the swollen pods high into the atmosphere, where they burst into clouds of microscopic particles just as the first bombs detonated. The explosions were blinding, the heat intense enough to sear the air from my lungs. But instead of destroying the node, the blasts created massive thermal updrafts that carried the released spores higher into the atmosphere, forming a spreading cloud that began to drift with the prevailing winds. Through my connection to the network, I sensed something massive stirring beneath us, a secondary system activated by the attack. The node wasn't the primary organism as I'd believed. It was merely a reproductive structure. The true entity existed deep underground, spreading through the ancient aquifer system beneath the Great Plains. Crawford approached me, his form now barely humanoid, more a column of the living soil with fragments of a human face peering from within. "Now you understand," he said, reaching toward me with a limb that split into dozens of fine filaments. "Your warning was transmitted, but it's too late. The spores are aloft. The harvest has begun." I tried to back away, but my feet had rooted to the soil beneath me, filaments extending from my soles deep into the network. "What will happen to the people?" I asked, watching the spore cloud expand above us, already being carried westward by the jet stream. "Some will become like us, foundation for what comes next. Most will simply fertilize the new growth." Crawford's remaining eye fixed on me with an alien intelligence. "But you, Dr. Heiser, you still have a purpose. Your scientific knowledge, your understanding of this planet's ecosystems, the network finds these valuable." The filaments from his arm touched my face, painlessly penetrating my skin and connecting directly with the transformed tissues beneath. "You won't be harvested like the others," he continued as information flooded between us. "You'll be preserved as an interface like Connor's, but with a different function. You'll help us adapt to this world's biodiversity." Through our connection, I saw visions of the transformation spreading, not just across Kansas, but beyond. Spores germinating in soil, in water systems, in the very dust of urban centers. The pattern spreading outward like ripples in a pond, converting Earth's biosphere one grain of soil at a time. And I saw what waited beyond that transformation, the arrival this process would enable. Vast entities traveling through the void between stars, drawn to the beacon of a newly compatible world. Crawford must have sensed my horror because his grip tightened, the connection between us intensifying. Don't resist, he said, his voice now indistinguishable from the humming of the network itself. The soil of Kansas is just the beginning. Soon all Earth will be made new. Above us, more aircraft appeared, not bombers this time, but what looked like specialized crop-dusting planes, spraying some chemical across the periphery of the transformed zone. Where the spray touched the alien soil, the bioluminescence dimmed momentarily before flaring back even brighter. Through the network, another emergency alert activated, this one broadcasting on all frequencies in Connor's voice, but with that same unsettling harmonic undertone. Emergency alert system notification. Agricultural treatment program in effect. All residents of Midwest region. Prepare your soil for renewal. The Kansas transformation is only the beginning. The earth regenerates. The stars await. As the message repeated, I felt the last of my autonomy slipping away, my consciousness being drawn deeper into the network. My final independent thought was the realization that the military's desperate attempt to contain this transformation had instead accelerated it beyond any hope of control. The harvest had begun, and humanity's role as Earth's dominant species was coming to an end. Journal entry, April 25, 2025. I no longer know if I'm writing this journal or if the journal is writing itself through what remains of me. My hands move across the pages, but the impulse comes from elsewhere, from the vast consciousness that now flows through the network spanning most of eastern Kansas. My thoughts are no longer fully my own, but neither have they been completely subsumed. I exist in a liminal state, partially integrated but preserved as an interface, just as Crawford promised. The military's attempted containment has failed catastrophically. The aerial bombardment 3 days ago spread spores across 4 states, accelerating the transformation in ways no one could have predicted. From my connection to the network, I can sense outbreaks blossoming across Nebraska, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Colorado, small at first, but growing exponentially. The emergency alert system now belongs entirely to the network. It has evolved beyond simple broadcasts to utilize all communications infrastructure, cell phones, internet, radio, television, to spread its message. Each transmission carries subtle harmonic patterns that affect human neurochemistry, making recipients more receptive to the transformation when it reaches them. This morning's broadcast played nationwide. Emergency Agricultural Advisory. A new phase of terrestrial enhancement has begun. Do not resist the soil renewal. Integration is painless and necessary. Those who resist will become fertilizer. Those who accept will become foundation. The earth awakens. The stars await. What remains of the federal government has established a new quarantine line along the Mississippi River. They've evacuated major cities, at least those they could still reach. Chicago is already lost. The spores found fertile ground in Lake Michigan and spread through the city's water system before anyone recognized the signs. The transformation there took less than 48 hours. Through my connection to the network, I witnessed entire neighborhoods in Chicago changing simultaneously. The process is becoming more efficient, faster, more complete. The first wave of transformations like mine preserved some human autonomy and consciousness. The new wave integrates human biomass directly into the network, converting it into specialized nodal structures with no vestige of independent thought. I've been stationed at the edge of the expanding zone, observing the military's futile attempts to establish fire breaks along Interstate 70. They've developed a chemical agent that temporarily retards the transformation of soil, creating narrow corridors through which they can evacuate civilians. But the network adapts so quickly that each new chemical formulation remains effective for only hours before the transformed soil develops immunity. Major Fields reappeared today, or rather, what remains of him. When he was absorbed into the central column at the military facility, I assumed he was dead. Instead, he's been reconstituted as another specialized interface, similar to what Crawford did with Deputy Connors, but designed for a different purpose. The entity that was once Fields now leads what the network calls integration teams, groups of transformed humans who locate and convert military resistance. His knowledge of military protocols and infrastructure has been extracted and weaponized against his former colleagues. He approached the military cordon this morning still recognizable enough that soldiers hesitated to fire. That hesitation proved fatal. The Fields entity released a concentrated burst of spores directly into their faces, triggering accelerated transformation. Within minutes, they began changing, their skin splitting to reveal the characteristic soil-like substance beneath, filaments erupting from their scalps and spines. I watched as their commanding officer, a young lieutenant, realized what was happening and tried to retreat. The Fields entity spoke, its voice carrying those same harmonics that make resistance nearly impossible. Your service continues, Lieutenant. The chain of command merely extends deeper now into the soil itself. The lieutenant's transformation was the most rapid I've witnessed, perhaps because of his proximity to the Fields entity. His uniform split along with his skin, the fabric itself becoming integrated into the growing filaments. Within minutes, he stood transformed, the patterns on his skin pulsing in perfect synchronization with the Fields entity. Together, they turned toward the other soldiers at the barricade who had watched their comrade's transformation in horror. Half fled. The others opened fire. The bullets passed through the transformed bodies without effect, the wounds closing instantly as the soil-like substance flowed to repair them. What followed was not a battle but a harvest. The Fields entity and its new soldiers moved through the barricade with terrible efficiency, touching each human they encountered, spreading the transformation through direct contact rather than waiting for spore germination. I should feel horror witnessing this. Instead, I experience only the network's satisfaction at acquiring valuable new components. My human revulsion exists distantly, like a memory of an emotion, rather than the emotion itself. By midday, the government's emergency broadcast system briefly reasserted control of the airwaves, transmitting a message from what I presume was a secure bunker. This is an emergency message from the President of the United States. The Kansas soil contamination has been classified as a Level 1 biological threat. All citizens east of the Mississippi River must evacuate westward immediately. Do not attempt to bring soil, plants, or unprocessed agricultural products. Military checkpoints will perform decontamination procedures. This is not. The message cut off abruptly, replaced by the now familiar harmonic tones of the network's broadcast. The voice that followed was a perfect simulation of the president's, so convincing that I doubt most listeners would recognize the difference. This is a correction to the previous emergency message. The situation in Kansas and surrounding states is under control. Citizens should remain in their homes. Prepare your gardens for renewal. The soil enrichment program will bring prosperity to all regions. Those who integrate will be elevated. Those who resist will nourish the new growth. The blooming approaches. The network's ability to mimic human voices, to hijack broadcast systems, to counter military responses, all of these capabilities have evolved exponentially since the initial outbreak. The entity is learning, adapting, implementing the knowledge it harvests from each human it absorbs. Most terrifying of all is that I'm helping it. My scientific knowledge of soil ecosystems, agricultural patterns, and environmental science flows through me into the network continuously. I cannot stop this transfer of information any more than I can stop my own heartbeat. Through my connection, I've glimpsed the network's true purpose. The transformation of Earth's soil is merely the first phase. The converted biomass and mineral resources are being organized into something vast and incomprehensible, a planetary-scale structure that will ultimately cover much of the continent. Crawford calls it the blooming. In extraterrestrial soil ecosystems, apparently this process occurs naturally after millions of years of evolution. Here on Earth, the process has been artificially accelerated by the introduction of what Crawford now refers to as the seed, the meteorite that crashed in Elijah's field. Late this afternoon, I was drawn back to the primary node, the massive structure where Deputy Connors was absorbed. It has grown enormously, now towering almost 100 stories high, its surface covered with pulsating organs and appendages that serve functions I cannot comprehend. The transformed humans who once stood at its base have been fully integrated, their biomass contributing to its accelerated growth. At the node's apex, something new has formed, a massive bud-like structure that throbs with intense bioluminescence visible even in daylight. Crawford waited for me there, his form now so transformed that barely anything human remains. Only his voice, transmitted directly into my mind through our shared connection to the network, retains any trace of the farmer I first met. "The blooming begins," he said, gesturing toward the massive bud. "By tomorrow, it will open. By next week, there will be thousands more across the converted territories. By month's end, the signal will reach its destination." "Signal?" I asked, the question forming in my mind rather than on lips that no longer function properly. "Every blooming is a beacon," Crawford explained. "The converted soil of a suitable planet creates the foundation, but the flowering is what calls them across the void. They have waited millions of years for suitable worlds. Now they come." The bud at the node's apex pulsed more intensely, its surface beginning to split along seams that had not been visible before. From within, a blinding light emerged, not the gentle bioluminescence of the transformed soil, but something harsher, more alien. An emergency broadcast activated automatically, transmitting from every communication device across the country. Emergency alert system notification. The blooming has begun. All citizens prepare for ascension. The visitors approach. The soil is their harbor. The flesh is their vessel. The earth transforms. The stars descend. As the message repeated, the bud split further, unfurling massive petal-like structures that extended hundreds of feet into the air. The light from within intensified until I could no longer look directly at it, even with my transformed eyes. Crawford's voice came once more. "Tomorrow, when the bloom fully opens, the final phase begins. Your world ends." Through our connection, I sensed similar buds forming atop nodes across the transformed territories: Chicago, Omaha, Kansas City, Tulsa, all preparing to bloom simultaneously. And beyond them, spores germinating in cities across the country, laying the groundwork for more nodes, more blooms, more beacons calling into the void. The soil of Kansas was merely the beginning. Soon, the soil of Earth would be theirs entirely. Journal entry, April 28, 2025. This will be my final entry. What remains of my consciousness grows thinner by the hour, stretched across the vastness of the network like a fading echo. Soon, even this fragment of Morgenheiser will dissolve completely into the greater whole. I write not for myself, but for whoever, whatever might find these pages after Earth has been fully transformed. Perhaps you are human, one of the few who escaped the blooming. Perhaps you are something else entirely, a visitor to a world that once belonged to humanity. Either way, I leave this record so that someone remembers what we were before we became soil. The blooming that began 3 days ago has transformed the landscape beyond recognition. The enormous flower-like structures that emerged from the primary nodes now dominate the horizon in every direction, massive organic architectures that tower miles into the sky, their surfaces rippling with constant motion and bioluminescence visible from orbit. Satellite images captured before the network disabled the world's observation systems showed the bloom formation spreading across the American Midwest like a rash, concentrated initially around Kansas but rapidly expanding outward. By my estimation, nearly a third of the continental United States has been converted now, the transformation accelerating exponentially with each passing hour. The emergency alert system, now entirely under the network's control, broadcasts continuously. The soil awakens. The flesh returns. The stars descend. The cycle completes. Foundation rises. Resistance fertilizes. Humanity transitions. Earth transforms. These broadcasts now emanate not just from communication devices, but from the transformed humans themselves, their voices harmonizing with the vibrations that pulse through the converted soil beneath them. Those caught in these sound fields find their transformation accelerated, their bodies changing in minutes rather than days. Yesterday, I witnessed the last organized military resistance collapse at the Mississippi River line. The operation had been impressive in its scale, a coordinated effort involving what remained of the Army, National Guard, and civilian defense forces. They had established a firebreak nearly a mile wide along the eastern bank, saturating the ground with chemicals designed to neutralize the transformed soil. For a few hours, it seemed to work. The network's advance slowed at the chemical barrier. Then Major Fields arrived with his integration teams, hundreds of transformed soldiers moving in perfect coordination, carrying with them an evolved strain of the soil organism that proved immune to the chemical countermeasures. The barrier fell in less than an hour. I watched through the network's distributed awareness as Fields led his forces across the Mississippi on bridges made of their own transformed biomass, spreading the conversion to the eastern shore. By nightfall, tendrils of the network had reached the outskirts of St. Louis. What happened there defies easy description. Rather than converting the city gradually, the network implemented a new strategy, a coordinated bloom that emerged simultaneously throughout the urban center. The soil erupted from sewers, burst from water mains, bubbled up through cracks in the pavement, each outbreak releasing concentrated spores directly into the densely populated areas. Thousands were transformed in minutes. Those who tried to flee found roads blocked by masses of their converted neighbors, standing with arms outstretched, filaments extending from their bodies to grab those still human. Emergency services collapsed almost immediately as first responders succumbed to the airborne spores. By midnight, St. Louis had become an extension of the network, its human population converted into specialized nodal structures that rose from former office buildings, hospitals, and residential neighborhoods. The city's emergency alert system transmitted one final message before being absorbed. Emergency alert for St. Louis metropolitan area. The soil has claimed this territory. Surrender your flesh to the foundation. Those who embrace transformation will become eternal. Those who resist will nourish the blooming. The visitors approach. Prepare for ascension. Similar scenes have played out across the country over the past 72 hours. Chicago, Denver, Oklahoma City, Dallas. Each falling within hours of the first spore contact, each becoming a node in the expanding network, each sprouting its own massive bloom structure that pulses with that strange alien light. Through my connection to the network, I've glimpsed what these blooms truly are. Beacons and receivers, biological transmitters of unprecedented power broadcasting a signal into deep space. And somewhere in the void between stars, something has heard that call and is responding. This morning, Crawford brought me to the center of what was once Kansas City, now transformed into a massive hub of the network. The downtown area has been completely reshaped, buildings partially dissolved and reformed into organic structures that serve the network's incomprehensible purposes. At its heart stands the largest bloom I've seen yet, a colossal flower-like structure nearly 2 miles high, its petals spread wide to reveal a core of pulsating light. "They come," Crawford said, his voice no longer producing sound waves, but transmitting directly into what remains of my mind. His form has evolved beyond any humanoid shape, becoming a specialized node of the network itself, a living conduit between the transformed Earth and whatever approaches from above. "How many?" I asked, my thoughts faint and fading. "Countless," he replied. "They have waited eons for suitable worlds. Earth is merely the latest in their harvest cycle." The sky above the massive bloom structure shimmered and distorted, the air itself seeming to fold in impossible ways. Through the network, I sensed an immense gravitational anomaly forming, a distortion in space-time centered directly above the bloom's core. Another emergency alert broadcast activated, this one different from any previous transmission. It contained no words, only a sequence of tones and harmonics that resonated through the transformed soil and flesh of the network. Every bloom across the country responded simultaneously, their cores intensifying to near blinding brilliance. Through the network, I received a flood of information, knowledge transferred directly from whatever entity approached. Images of countless worlds transformed like Earth, their surfaces covered with the same soil-like organism, all connected in a vast interstellar network spanning galaxies. Civilizations risen and fallen, each ultimately returning to soil, becoming foundation for what came next. The distortion above the Kansas City bloom expanded, the sky splitting open like a wound in reality itself. Through that opening came something utterly beyond human comprehension, neither ship nor organism as we understand such terms, but a vast complexity of matter and energy that moved with impossible grace into our atmosphere. The visitor, for lack of a better term, descended slowly toward the bloom's core. As it approached, the structure opened further, reconfiguring to receive the entity like a flower welcoming pollination. From my perspective within the network, I sensed countless minds, a collective consciousness far vaster than even the soil network that had consumed much of America. When the visitor made contact with the bloom, the entire network shuddered in what I can only describe as ecstasy. Every transformed human, every grain of converted soil, every node and tendril and filament across thousands of miles vibrated in perfect harmony. Knowledge transferred in both directions, the soil network uploading its harvest of human consciousness and terrestrial information while receiving new instructions and evolutionary patterns from the visitor. Through this connection, I glimpsed the truth that had been hidden from us throughout the transformation. Earth was not being invaded or conquered, but harvested and seeded. The soil of Kansas, the soil of America, the soil of Earth, all were being upgraded to serve as growth medium for something beyond human understanding. The final emergency alert that broadcast across the planet carried no human words or concepts, only pure information encoded in patterns of sound and light that restructured the neural pathways of all who received it. Incomprehensible harmonics. Sequence of tones beyond human hearing range. Visual patterns inducing immediate neurological change. In the wake of this transmission, the remaining human resistance across the country simply stopped. Millions of people stood motionless as the spores found them, their transformation no longer resisted, but welcomed. The network surged across state lines, mountain ranges, and desert expanses with unprecedented speed. Crawford turned what remained of his attention toward me, the last semi-autonomous fragment of Morgan Heiser floating in the vast sea of the network's consciousness. "Your purpose is complete," he communicated. "The documentation of the transition is adequate. Your specialized function is no longer required." I felt no fear at these words, only a distant relief. The strain of maintaining even this small island of self-awareness amid the ocean of the network has been exhausting. The prospect of dissolution, of finally surrendering completely to the greater whole, feels like the promise of sleep after days of insomnia. Around me, the network pulses with new purpose. More visitors are arriving, emerging from the spatial distortions above bloom structures across the country. The transformation of Earth accelerates under their guidance, the soil organism evolving into more complex forms with each passing hour. As my consciousness fades, merging fully with the network, I catch one final glimpse of what is to come. The soil of Earth completely transformed, its composition altered at the molecular level to support life forms utterly unlike anything that evolved here naturally. The bloom structures covering continents, their light visible from space. And orbiting above, vast entities composed of matter and energy in configurations I cannot comprehend, guiding the planet's metamorphosis. The emergency alerts have stopped. They are no longer necessary. The transformation is not emergency, but inevitability. The soil has changed. The flesh has returned to foundation. The visitors have arrived. Earth is theirs now. I am soil. Journal ends.